There is a calculating logic behind why society underestimates you, why peers speak over you during discussions, and why they continually test the elasticity of your patience. They brazenly push against your boundaries and question your intrinsic worth, not because you are incompetent, but because you are perceived as safe. You are harmless. You reveal your entire hand before the game has even begun. You display your emotional cards too openly. You prioritize being liked over being respected. Ignoring the fundamental law of power in a Machiavellian world, being loved without being feared is indistinguishable from being invisible. Human nature does not respect benevolence. It respects ambiguity. The world does not fear goodness. It fears the unknown. It fears the mystery you fail to provide. From childhood, you have been conditioned to project the image of the good citizen. You were told to smile more, to remain open, to extend kindness first, and to be perpetually accessible. However, the brutal reality is that people do not respect those they can walk over. They utilize them. Because what is fully visible is entirely predictable, and anything that is predictable can be easily controlled. Machiavelli understood this dynamic intimately. His writings were not designed to comfort the weak, but to warn the naive. A leader who lacks the capacity to induce fear will always remain a target. This does not imply you must resort to violence or cruelty. It means you must become a cipher, someone unreadable, cryptic, and impossible to decipher. Consider a room filled with loud, boisterous personalities. The individual who remains silent is the one who commands the room's subconscious attention. They are not watched because people expect entertainment, but because they sense a dormant power. They sense something they cannot label, and that terrorizes them. That is the objective. To be observed, not for the sake of vanity, but as a precautionary measure by those around you. When you pose no threat, you become a utility, a tool to be used and discarded. Reflect on your own history. How often were you treated as background noise until the moment you physically removed yourself from the equation? How many times did their appreciation only manifest after you withdrew your presence and embraced silence? How many individuals only began to respect your borders after you enforced them with cold, hard distance? This happens because you were playing the game of morality while they were playing the game of power. They calculated that you would offer explanations, that you would forgive their transgressions, that you would remain loyal, and that you would never dare to escalate the conflict. Once an adversary knows you lack the will to escalate, they will instinctively strike first, and they will invariably win. Machiavelli observed this in the courts of Italy, but it applies everywhere. You witness this dynamic in your romantic relationships, your corporate career, and within your own family hierarchy. Predators do not test the dangerous animals. They test the ones who are emotionally porous because they know your own empathy will restrain you long before your dignity kicks in. However, the moment you transform into a threat, even a silent psychological one, they hesitate. They flinch before they speak. They analyze their tone. They prepare their words with meticulous care. They pause before disrespecting you. Why? Because now there is a lingering doubt that while you may not bark, you possess the capacity to bite. This is the overwhelming power of the unexpressed. They are waiting for your reaction. That is their metric for control. Can they provoke a flinch? Can they force you into a defensive explanation? Can they manipulate you into chasing their approval? Can they make you yield every time you react? They mark you as safe. Every time you remain stoic, they mark you as hazardous. Being dangerous does not mean being unstable or unhinged. It means being utterly unreadable. Machiavelli realized that the second people can forecast your emotional weather, they will construct their future plans around their needs, completely disregarding yours. But when your internal state is a fortress, they wait, they watch, and ultimately they submit. You have spent decades trying to secure love as a priority. In 2026, attempt to be feared quietly, not through shouting or overt threats, but through inconsistency, through strategic silence, and through a refusal to bleed emotionally on command. The individual who enters a room beaming with a desperate smile is instantly forgotten. But the man who enters with no compulsion to speak becomes a palpable presence. True presence has a longer half-life than the loudest voice. Machiavelli never advocated picking up a weapon unless the psychological war had already been won through perception. In the real world, your actual nature is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what people believe you are capable of doing. You do not need to be physically dangerous. You simply need to be perceived as a dormant volcano. And how is this achieved? By withholding your words. You must master your visibility. You must regulate your energy output. You must weaponize the silence. Because in every social hierarchy, one rule is absolute. Humans fear what they cannot comprehend, and they inevitably respect what they fear. Therefore, rule number 1, never display your full hand. The loud ones, the amateurs, they expose everything. They broadcast their ambitions, their deepest insecurities, their strategic plans, and their emotional triggers for the world to see. They speak incessantly. They try to prove their worth. They flex their ego. And the more they reveal, the easier it becomes for a strategist to calculate the exact method to dismantle them. Machiavelli did not teach the art of exposure. He taught the art of opacity. He knew that if they can read your manual, they can replace you with a newer model. If they cannot read you, they must prepare for you. So speak less than necessary. React with deliberate slowness. Keep your true intentions shrouded in a thick mental fog. This is not to create confusion, but to dictate exactly how you're interpreted. In a modern world where everyone is screaming to be seen, the one person they cannot define is the one they become obsessed with. Rule number 2, never defend and never explain. Nothing destroys the illusion of strength faster than defensiveness. If an opponent criticizes you and you rush to explain yourself, you are confirming that their arrow hit the target. If they accuse you of being distant and you attempt to defend your silence, you reveal that their opinion matters more than your own peace. Every time you justify your behavior, you're sending a clear signal. You still have emotional access to me. A true strategist would simply stare blankly. He would nod, perhaps offer a slight enigmatic smile, and simply say, "Noted." That is how you become a psychological threat. You absorb everything and return absolutely nothing. Rule number 3, purposefully transmit mixed signals. A valid threat does not need to be aggressive. It needs to be fundamentally unpredictable. People do not fear the things they understand. They fear that which contradicts itself. A Machiavellian strategist would praise an ally today and replace him tomorrow. They would smile warmly during a conversation and silence you completely by the following week. They offer kindness one moment and vanish without a trace the next. Why? Because nothing generates emotional instability and compliance quite like the fear of inconsistency. Volatility breeds compliance. When your emotional state is difficult to predict, you create a psychological dependency in others. You do not need to resort to overt cruelty to control the narrative. You simply need to cultivate an air of unpredictability, a fog of strategic ambiguity that compels others to maintain a respectful distance because they are terrified of triggering a side of you they have not yet witnessed. In the modern lexicon, we label this mystery. But Machiavelli understood it as a fundamental strategic necessity, a carefully constructed illusion of potential danger. This brings us to the 4th principle. Maintain absolute composure while those around you descend into hysteria. There is no form of intimidation more potent than demonstrating total self-mastery in the midst of absolute chaos. When the whispers start, you offer nothing but silence. When voices are raised, you simply blink, unhurried and deliberate. When panic sets in, your voice drops to a calm, steady register. And when insults fly, you counter with a faint, knowing smile. This behavior signals a singular, undeniable truth: you're immovable. If they cannot rattle your emotional cage, they realize they lack the leverage to shift your position. And if you cannot be moved by their petty storms, they must begin to dread what piece on the board you will decide to move next. It is that unnerving stillness, that refusal to engage in escalation, that creates true dread. That is the precise moment you transcend the role of a mere participant in the conflict and transform into a gravitational presence that everyone else is forced to orbit. Niccolo Machiavelli would argue that it is infinitely more powerful to utter a single decisive sentence at the conclusion of a dispute than to offer 100 frantic defenses during it. The economy of language dictates that the fewer words you use, the more devastating weight each one carries. When your adversaries cannot forecast your verbal response, they instinctively begin to self-correct and modify their behavior long before you even open your mouth. Do not mistake this for communication. This is psychological command. When the average person hears threat, they imagine physical violence, but when they perceive dominance, they understand it as absolute control. But the master strategist knew better. He was not fixated on power derived from brute force. He was obsessed with the accumulation of power through sheer, overwhelming presence. Look around any boardroom or hierarchy. The most feared individuals are invariably those who appear to do the least yet command the highest degree of attention. It remains much safer to be feared than loved if you cannot achieve both. This is not because fear necessitates cruelty, but because fear compels others to respect your silence and hesitate before crossing you. You are never required to actually strike. You only need to cultivate the unshakable conviction in their minds that you are capable of doing so. That psychological certainty is far more persuasive than any logical argument you could ever construct. Those who present themselves as harmless are essentially issuing an open invitation to be disrespected. Let us delve deeper into the psychology of leverage. When an individual has no fear of losing access to you, they will plunder your time, interrupt your speech, demand more than they contribute, and expect endless explanations for your autonomy. They do this because your presence registers as weightless. In their mental calculus, you're a resource to be used, not a force to be reckoned with. You appear safe, entirely predictable, overly kind, and accommodating. In the cold light of a Machiavellian reality, these are not virtues to be admired. They are glaring structural weaknesses begging to be exploited. So what does a genuine modern threat look like? It is not a weapon, it is not a raised voice, and it is not an act of petty revenge. A true threat is the act of saying absolutely nothing after a blatant disrespect. It is the ability to remain icily calm while others spread rumors and gossip. It is being radically unpredictable without ever becoming emotional. It is the power to vanish from a room and leave a vacuum so heavy that everyone feels the drop in pressure. That is fear. And realize that this fear is your ultimate leverage. You cease to be viewed as just another person. You evolve into a walking consequence. Once people encounter your detachment, your strategic withdrawal, and your refusal to chase their approval, they begin to associate your silence with a tectonic shift in their reality. When you cease to reply, they are forced to reflect. When you restrict your output, they overanalyze every micro-expression. When you fail to appear, your absence looms larger than your presence ever could. Your lack of engagement becomes a mirror. It is not that you have actively punished them, but rather that they are suddenly struck by a terrifying realization. Without his validation, I no longer know how to measure my own worth. That is the essence of psychological warfare. Machiavelli did not require vast armies to manufacture fear. He utilized silence-calculated distance and weaponized uncertainty. Because when people cannot decode your next maneuver, they inevitably choose one of two paths: they retreat entirely, or they scramble desperately to win back your favor. Understand that both outcomes serve your agenda. You must build the wolf and eradicate the dog. There is a profound reason why concepts like "kill the dog in you" are dominating the algorithms in 2026. The Machiavellian mindset demands the wolf because society is collectively waking up to the agonizing pain of living as the emotional dog. That dog is loyal even when betrayed, friendly even when mocked, and obedient even when ignored. Everyone is tired of the leash. Everyone wants to metamorphose into the wolf. But here is the critical insight: they miss the true. Wolf does not bark. He simply watches from the tree line. And when he finally decides to move, the prey is never ready. That is the archetype you must embody. You do not bark. You do not offer explanations. You never beg. Instead, you calculate variables and you withhold access. You allow others to feel the chill of your judgment without ever raising your tone. History teaches us that the most unforgettable figures are often the quietest. Here lies the irony of influence: loud people are remembered only in the moment they are making noise. Still, people are burned into the memory long after they are gone, because hours after you have left the room, they are still replaying what they cannot define. Why didn't he say anything? Was he testing us? What was the hidden meaning behind that silence? They cannot move on because you denied them the luxury of closure. And when the human mind cannot close a file, it is compelled to reread it for eternity. That is how true threats are born, not from kinetic action, but from unlimited potential. You do not have to utter a single word to completely dominate a room. Most real power is never spoken aloud. It is signaled through posture, through an aura of presence, and arguably, most importantly, through what you refuse to do while everyone else is desperate to be seen. Machiavelli would not bark orders like a common taskmaster. He would observe with clinical detachment. He would allow others to reveal their hands. And then, without ever raising his voice, he would force them to fear the heavy space between his words. Do you want to become a genuine threat? You must begin with daily habits that make people question the extent of your reach. Habit number 1. Never under any circumstance be the first to react. When someone throws out a comment that is offensive baiting or triggering you, simply wait. Watch as everyone else rushes to respond, to defend their ego, to secure the last word, but not you. You blink slowly. You hold the pause. You let their chaotic energy bounce harmlessly off your wall of stillness. And why do you do this? Because in the laws of power, every person who reacts first is automatically categorized as the weaker party. But the one who waits, that is the predator, whose next move everyone is terrified to anticipate. Machiavelli understood that responding too quickly signals subservience, so he employed a tactical deafness, preferring to let a statement hang in the air rather than replying before the speaker had fully exhausted their thought. This vacuum of silence is not born of hesitation. It is a weapon of calculation, and the human mind is far more terrified of being quietly assessed than it is of being loudly confronted. The second principle involves a deliberate deceleration of behavior. Reduce your velocity limit, your verbal output, and exit the interaction before the climax. A triad that fundamentally rewires how others perceive your status. Decelerated speech projects absolute command over time. Brevity signals that your words are a high-value resource, and premature departure breeds an intoxicating sense of mystery. While the masses babble to be comprehended, you must operate differently. True authority does not beg for understanding. It demands interpretation. Compelling those around you to obsessively analyze your subtext and ask, what was the hidden meaning behind that look? They will torture themselves wondering if your silence was an endorsement or a warning, and they will scramble to understand why you disengaged exactly when the atmosphere changed. The strategist unnerved his rivals not by raising his voice, but by becoming a ghost. He withdrew before he could be categorized, knowing that the human mind instinctively fears what it cannot define. The third discipline dictates that you must strategically withdraw to amplify your impact. The most dominant figures in history were rarely the most visible, but when they did materialize, the gravity of the room shifted instantly. This phenomenon occurs because they understand the law of supply and demand applied to social presence. They refuse to saturate the market with their image. You must excise yourself from group chats, social gatherings, arguments, and boardrooms before you become part of the furniture, distinguishing yourself from the golden retriever that is always available versus the timber wolf that strikes and fades. When the predator slips away into the tree line, the entire forest holds its breath, asking where he went. And it was through this calculated scarcity that Machiavelli ensured he was always the primary focus of attention. Train yourself to be the void they notice, not the fixture they ignore. This leads to the fourth law, which is to eliminate the desperate urge to rationalize your maneuvers as explanations are for subordinates. Your natural instinct is to seek rapport through transparency, hoping to be seen as honest, but the strategist knew that every unsolicited explanation is a chip taken out of your authority. If you decline an offer, let the no stand naked and unadorned. If you pivot, your strategy simply move without offering a monologue on your motives or cushioning the blow for others. Strip away the emotional packaging and the need to justify your boundaries, because the moment you begin to explain your actions, you have subconsciously begun to defend them. And the second you shift into a defensive posture, you have abdicated the throne of command and entered a negotiation, and a true threat never negotiates their reality. The fifth habit requires maintaining absolute emotional zero during social friction, as you will inevitably notice that peers and rivals constantly probe your defenses to locate your trigger points. They will deploy sarcasm, throw out provocative statements, or feign ignorance specifically to see if you will break frame to correct them. They will weaponize awkward silences, flirtation, subtle jabs, or guilt trips solely to fracture your stoic mask and force a reaction. They do this because they can sense that unreadable energy radiating from you, and it terrifies them. They need to crack the code to reassure themselves that you are manageable, for if they cannot, they must accept you are the stronger entity. Let them stew in their assumptions while you offer a slight ambiguous smile. Observe their panic and disengage, because your leverage grows with every failed attempt they make to decipher you. As they struggle to read your blank canvas, you gain psychological ground. Machiavelli did not merely role-play authority, he embodied it. He ingrained rituals of restraint and micro-movements of control into his daily existence, projecting a posture that whispered, "My potential for damage is vast and invisible, and while you may never see it, you certainly do not want to provoke it." However, one must navigate the razor's edge between being an enigmatic power and being socially invisible, distinguishing between the silence that commands a room and the silence that is simply ignored. The Florentine's genius lay not in choosing terror over admiration, but in understanding the alchemy required to fuse them together. He mastered the balance so perfectly that even when he remained mute, his name continued to echo in the minds of the council long after he had departed. Terror unaccompanied by competence creates revolutionaries. If your power relies solely on fear, your subjects will mime obedience while sharpening their knives in the shadows. They will perform compliance in the light, but engineer sabotage in the dark, submitting on the surface while building a reservoir of resentment underground, which is the hallmark of fragile power. Tyranny may secure order for the afternoon, but it guarantees betrayal by evening, a trap that the master strategist carefully avoided. This is why he did not just command through silence. He earned deference through unpredictability, layering dread with a controlled form of admiration. You're not seeking love or popularity, but reverence the psychological stance where your peers think, "He possesses the capacity to ruin me, yet he chooses mercy." Conversely, admiration devoid of edge invites exploitation. If you are merely respected for your utility, people will begin to praise you openly while secretly using you. They will trust your competence and laud your leadership, but eventually the ask will exceed the give, and they will begin to interrupt you without a second thought. They will come to view your kindness as an infinite resource and your patience as a guarantee, causing you to become liked rather than watched. And when eyes are off, boundaries are crossed. The antidote is cultivated tension. The apex predators of the social hierarchy carry a heavy atmosphere with them that forces others to pay attention. Do not mistake this for emotional drama. It is static electricity, the subtle unspoken understanding that while you're civilized, you are not harmless. You are dormant, not dead, and this friction keeps those around you in a state of hyper-awareness because they can never be quite sure how much of your persona is a performance. The moment people begin to calculate your depth and assess the risk you pose, they abandon any plans to manipulate or control you. To manufacture this gravity, follow the Machiavellian blueprint. Maintain ironclad consistency in your discipline, but remain erratic in your warmth. Your self-control must be absolute, but your emotional accessibility should fluctuate, ensuring you're always composed, but not always welcoming. Be stoic one day, faintly amused the next, and utterly opaque the day after. Never lose your temper, but never be fully transparent, keeping yourself collected but unavailable. This calculated inconsistency destroys their equilibrium. Give them a single moment of clarity, and then disappear, ensuring that when you do speak, it is with the precision of a scalpel. You do not argue. You terminate the debate with a single irrefutable insight, or you diffuse a chaotic situation with one carefully placed sentence. You issue a correction once without anger, and then physically remove yourself from the environment, leaving the conclusion hanging in the air for them to process. Never repeat yourself, for a message left open-ended haunts the mind far longer than 1,000 lectures, and that lingering silence is the architecture of lasting tension. Force them to genuinely experience the vacuum of your absence without ever uttering a single ultimatum. Machiavelli understood that true leverage isn't begging for eyes on you. He wouldn't waste breath broadcasting an exit. Instead, he would condition them to dread the sudden drop in temperature when he disengages. You simply stop the digital feedback loop. The nodding ceases. A frost settles over your demeanor. You vacate the premises ahead of schedule, completely silent. There is no final speech, no attempt at closure, just a widening abyss between you and them. That silence hits harder than shouting because they suddenly realize your proximity carried a value they failed to calculate. Now the ledger is balanced and they feel the debt. The next time they approach, they will tread with profound caution. Allow accolades to land without absorbing them. When the world throws flowers at your feet, you do not stoop to pick them up. You do not deflect the attention, and you certainly do not mirror their enthusiasm. You offer a measured nod, maintain unblinking eye contact, perhaps a ghost of a smirk, but you refuse to sign the contract of validation. You do not submit to their approval. Why play it this way? Because devouring praise reveals a starvation for approval that is frankly terrifying to witness. It signals that you assessed your own value long ago, rendering their applause a mere polite social courtesy rather than oxygen for your survival. This is the razor's edge of influence. You compel others to respect your immovability while simultaneously fearing the dark waters beneath that calm surface. That friction is power. That is precisely how Machiavelli would navigate the board in 2026. The loud players are merely observed. The silent players are seared into memory. He had no interest in merely barking orders in the present tense. His ambition was to colonize their thoughts hours, days, and weeks after the door clicked shut behind him. Real dominion has nothing to do with immediate force. It is entirely about a lingering gravity that remains heavy in the room long after you have departed. The most lethal form of influence is the one that offers no footnotes. As the old text reminds us, men are far quicker to forgive the execution of a father than the confiscation of their inheritance. So you must confront the mirror and ask, what archetype must I forge? You must become so vital that your disappearance feels like the stripping away of a birthright. We are going to construct that persona brick by brick. Understand that fascination is never born from availability. It is exclusively manufactured through scarcity. Nobody loses sleep over a puzzle they have already solved. They lie awake analyzing the thing that felt within reach but slipped through their fingers before they could claim it. This is the architecture of the unforgettable. You must be tangible enough to be real, yet distant enough to remain a phantom they cannot quite grasp. You grant them a singular second of piercing eye contact. You deliver a sentence that dissects reality more sharply than social norms allow. You project a stillness that rattles the nervous systems of the chaotic. And then, abruptly, you're gone. That void creates a psychological feedback loop they cannot resolve. Strategy number 1, completely subvert their expectations. The average person uploads their entire personality to you within the first 5 minutes. They are desperate to please, manic in their expression, and pathetically accessible. You will do the opposite. Smile rarely. Decelerate your speech. Offer zero data beyond the absolute minimum. This generates a behavioral contrast so jarring that it physically forces the room to decelerate to match your tempo. Watch as they instinctively adjust their volume, their posture, and even their respiratory rhythm. They aren't doing this because you asked. They are doing it because your gravitational pull warped the environment. You have now branded their subconscious. Strategy number 2. Trigger their projection, then starve it. People have a compulsive need to categorize. They will whisper that he is intense or she is an enigma. They will say, you are impenetrable. Good. Let them struggle. The moment they begin projecting their own fantasies onto your canvas, they begin the process of obsession. They will rewind the tapes of your silence. They will analyze the micro-movements of your face. They will write entire novels to fill in the blank pages you refuse to write for them. Never interrupt this process. Their imagination is working as your unpaid public relations firm. The deeper their confusion, the more frequent their return visits. Strategy number 3. Sever the connection mid-sentence. Whether metaphorically or literally, deny them the comfort of a tidy ending. Most humans survive on emotional closure. They crave the full dossier. They want the clean exit, the handshake, the final bow before the curtain falls. You will terminate the interaction 10% before it feels complete. You evaporate from the scene just before they feel satisfied. You hold your silence 3 seconds longer than polite society dictates. Why? Because that gap, that incompleteness, buries a hook in their mind. They will mentally rewalk that path 1,000 times, desperate to place the final brick in the wall. This is how a fleeting presence mutates into a permanent fixation. Strategy number 4. Guard your internal reality like a sovereign state. When they pry into your motivations, you reply, I am focused. When they ask about your welfare, you say, always calibrating. When they demand to know your desires, you answer, that depends entirely on the day. Feed them crumbs, never the loaf. The second someone possesses the map to your why, they immediately begin engineering your destruction. However, if your mind appears as an impregnable fortress, they cease their knocking. Instead, they stand outside, watching, wondering, and dedicating mental energy to you long after you have forgotten their names. The brilliance of Machiavelli was not found in his desire to be memorialized as a benevolent saint. It was his ability to be remembered as a man who possessed the capacity for anything, yet reserved the right to choose the time and place. That if is the ultimate psychological weapon. That is what haunts them. You have now ascended to the terminal phase where silence transforms from a tactic into a state of being. This becomes your operating system. You do not suppress your emotions out of fear. You simply adjudicate when, where, and if they deserve an audience. Machiavelli's ultimate incarnation was not noisy. It was not outwardly savage. It was relentlessly disciplined. Genuine power is not achieved when they follow you because they are terrified of your whip. It is achieved when they alter their own movements just in case you happen to be looking. The man who cannot be read is the man who cannot be trapped. As soon as they decode your algorithm, they begin to manage you. But the moment they accept, they will never reach the bottom of your soul. They abandon the attempt to control you. In that surrender, they grant you infinite territory because you have become a variable they cannot calculate. And that which is unpredictable inevitably becomes untouchable.